Hey, everybody, it's Chris Mahan with another Lead Your Teen podcast. If you are new to this podcast, thank you very much. We are all about the parent-child relationship with an emphasis on parental leadership, something I have been screaming for the last 11 years. I believe we are in desperate need of parental leadership in this country. We see the lack of it every day in the schools, in the streets, in the courtrooms, and all of this can be changed with more love and understanding and leadership in the living room. And that's what this podcast is all about. Today, I have a really awesome guest. He is someone I've known now for the last 5 years, and I've seen him grow as a young, naive, sometimes scared young man into a very independent, um, completely self-sufficient, successful, now young adult. And the trick is, though, he has autism. And so we're going to talk today about the misconceptions, the stereotypes, and what society sometimes deems as, things that people can't do because of a label. And I'm here to tell you that Cody's going to break all those labels. So today we have Cody Skeels with us, and he is from Florida. He's now in Georgia, so he's living on his own. Cody, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Chris?
Awesome. So, Cody, just to give everyone kind of a quick background of where you are in life right now, if you don't mind, I'm going to give kind of my how I met you, and we can kind of give a
hmm
little backstory, and then kind of tell people how you've progressed over the last 5 years, because it's been a huge jump, not only in your own personal growth, but just how you've had to deal with challenges that have come up in your life and how you're dealing with those now, which is very, very impressive. And again, because you have autism, people sometimes think that people with autism can't do things, right? That it's a horrible label. And we all have something. I have dyslexia. Everybody has something to deal with. So we got to break these myths. So today we're going to talk about some of those things. But just so everybody understands, I met Cody back at the height of COVID. It was in 2020. And he was a 22-year-old young man who came to the federal work program that I was working at that time, the WIOA youth program in Pasco Hernando County, Florida. And like all young people that came to that program, he was looking for something. He was looking for educational help, employment help, just kind of life skills in general, which is what we did in that program. It was a wonderful program. And on this particular day, when Cody came in, the workshop was happening, and there was probably about 15 kids in the class, plus all of us because it was COVID. So we all were crammed in one room, which was kind of silly at the time, but that's what it made us do. And all of a sudden, I see this new kid, which was Cody. He's looking a little nervous, and things are kind of looking a little weird. And I call him aside, and he's just freaking out. I thought, oh man, he's having a moment. The job coach or career coach at that time, I asked her, what's up with this kid? What's going on? She's like, oh, he has autism, and I think he's nervous and whatever. And me being me, I went up to him and I said, hey, what's going on? And come to find out, he was getting these messages from some people that were very, very threatening, to the point where I had to shut the building down, call the local police department. We had detectives come. Cody was escorted home in a police car. He wasn't arrested. This was because it was for his own safety. We didn't know at the time what was going on. And I followed him home and to make sure he got there and everything was going on okay and everything was fine. And Cody, take it from there. Who was actually doing this to you on that day?
They were at the time people I considered to be friends of mine, and I saw their true colors that day.
So, what were some of those messages? Do you remember some of the threats that they were giving us?
I don't remember them clearly, to be honest. It's something I don't like to touch on a little too much, but they certainly weren't friendly at all, and
Well,
it's
I can tell you that some of those threats, which is why we called the police, was because they were shooter threats, which is why I shut the building down. And there was one particular message where the guy said, "I see you," and he was watching us because myself and my coworker at the time were outside looking around. We got that message from you. We came back in the building, and that's when I called the police department. So you may have forgotten some of that, but there was a threat, and that's why we shut the building down. We locked it down, um, and that's when the whole thing started. So fast forward through that, you made it through the program, and Tell me about your life from there to like say the next year or so with getting work. How was that for you?
Um, I went through the program, got my high school diploma. I was set up with a paid internship at Goodwill. Um, I wasn't a fan of it, but it was work. It was something to get me experience. And I had a job offer from Goodwill, but I actually found employment through another company called Life Inc. They're a program that helps out disabled individuals. It's like a daytime program to, have people, with autism, Down syndrome, etc., just to have something to do during the day so they're not sitting at home all day.
Okay. And during that time, how were you growing as a person? Because again, I want to set this up. When Cody came into our program, he was a very nervous, dare I say, naive 22-year-old. And I think a lot of people took advantage of him because of his good heart and his kindness. They sometimes, weren't the nicest to him. And Cody, do you think being autistic, people did take advantage of you sometimes?
Absolutely, because some of the difficulties that I've had with it is seeing those red flags. It taught me to be careful who I let into my circle because not everyone who's around you necessarily has good intentions.
Right. So as the years went by, we ended up getting Cody. He's actually in my book. I interviewed him for my book. The new one's coming out. So his interview is in this book. It'll be on Audible soon. And we got him hired at our old job. So he went from a participant to a coworker. And how was that experience for you? Were you, because you're working with the public now, which
Mhm.
again, one of the misconceptions with autistic people is they can't communicate, right? They're not
Yeah.
verbally strong, they don't make eye contact, things like this. And yes, there's different levels of autism, but how did that affect you? Was that good for you? Did it make you nervous? How'd that work out?
I think it was good for me because I mean, number one, it gave me structure. It was a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job, but also it helped me with developing some of my communication skills and learning how to handle a room full of people, which for, certain individuals on the spectrum, that might be really overwhelming.
Did you ever get overwhelmed working in that environment?
I did. There was times that I did, but part of my coping mechanism was, to step outside the room for 5 minutes, take a deep breath, and then jump right back in.
Right. How were your coworkers with you? Now, I know again, they were much older
Mhm.
and everyone kind of, and just to set this up, guys, we all loved Cody. We wanted him to work there, okay, because we knew him through the other program and we knew he could do it. Unfortunately, for a lot of autistic people, they may not have that same kind of support system in a workplace or even at home sometimes, or in society in general. So we, as a work group, as a group of adult coworkers, we knew his situation. We knew that sometimes he would get nervous, and it's not that we enabled him to go run out and go do his thing, but we allowed him that accommodation, which is by law, that's something we have to do through the ADA. If someone says, "Hey, I got this," and an accommodation, it was reasonable. He went out, recentered himself, and came back, and it was all good. How did the people, like the clients, deal with you? Did they like you? Did people like your demeanor? Like the customers?
I think a lot of them like me, but there was all different kinds of situations that we had in there, and it's one of those environments where a first impression with a customer counts, and
Right.
so ideally you have to come to them with a smile and try to meet them where they're at. But unfortunately, some of them are going through such a bad time that it sometimes can turn into a negative encounter.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna leave this question right here. Have you ever had someone underestimate you at work, school, or in life, and how did you handle that? They underestimated you.
Hmm. Yeah, so I was underestimated a lot in school, and to be honest with you, at one point I was a slacker, but there was this instance in high school I remember I had a teacher who had practically no faith whatsoever in me and thought I wasn't going to go anywhere in life. But one day, to preface this, I'm a writer. I write lyrics, poetry, screenplays, etc. One day she read my writing and she was kind of blown away by it. And so that in some ways was encouraging me. And I think I was showing, my teachers I'm better than what you perceive.
So this is something I talk about all the time is the dangers of labels. We label people, we put them in this box, and then you're only as good as what the ingredients in that box, that label say you are. I've talked about it 1,000 times with myself with autism. I can't imagine what it's like, but being dyslexic and not finding that until I was in my 50s. About the time I met you is when I found out that I am dyslexic. So I live with this thing my whole life where people underestimate me all the time. And I think that's why when I deal with young people like you, I don't allow that word I can't, the two words I can't, or
Mhm.
the word disability, because we all have an ability of some kind to do something, which if more people understood that we all have an ability to offer, right? We all have a gift of some kind. And when we stifle that gift through labels and misconceptions and negative stereotypes and just prejudice, there's so many people that go through life then thinking they're not worth something. Did
Mhm.
you ever have a time in your life when you felt like I'm just not worthy, I'm just not going to ever have anything because of what people made you think?
I actually think that I felt some of that back in 2020 before I entered the program. I was um, someone at that time in my life, I was heavily aspiring to be a writer director in the film industry, as you know. And there was just a point that I reached where it's like, I'm never gonna make it. I'm never gonna make it out of mom's house. I'm never gonna be successful in the workforce. I won't even make a movie, you know? And I think I've come a long way since then.
So give me some examples of what were going through your head. Where did those ideas come from? Was it just a general thought, or were people telling you what you couldn't do?
I think it was just mental health at the time. Honestly, I had a thought pop into my head and it just spiraled, and it was something that I didn't take control of and fight back against.
Okay. What are some things? Let me go. I just pulled some questions up here.
Mhm.
Um, do you think schools and job programs do enough to help autistic teens get ready for the real world? Let's talk about school. I know our program did, but let's talk about school. Do you think public schools today is a general rule, not if you're in a specific, a program, but like just overall, how do you think the public school system is for kids with autism, maybe other disabilities
I
or
don't know how it
challenges? I hate disabilities. I'll say challenges.
is. Yeah, I don't know how it is these days, but I can tell you my experience as an autistic person growing up. I don't feel like I had a lot of the support I needed in the school system, especially to enter adult life. And I could say I think the same thing applies to anyone who doesn't have autism. I don't think anyone was prepared to enter the real world. We didn't know how to do taxes, we didn't know how to apply for a job, and so it's a challenge I think most young people face when they're about to graduate from high school.
That's a good point, and that's something that which is why our program existed because that's what we
Mhm.
did. We helped you with resumes, cover letters, interviewing, finding work, how to behave at a job, work ethic, things like that. So it is sad, and that's a whole other discussion with the school system because they're overwhelmed with everything they're going through,
Mhm.
and that goes back to home life, something I talk about in this podcast all the time, which is parental leadership, the parents that are doing things. Now, let me preface this with saying that about a year and a half, 2 years ago, Cody lost his mom. Prior to that, to the best of my knowledge, she was a really supportive mom. I met her a couple times. And Cody, tell me, how did your mom support you? Was she enabling to let you just kind of flounder your thing, or did she push you to be better beyond your own thoughts of what you could do?
She always pushed me to do better. Whenever I said that I couldn't do something, she would push me and say, "You don't know until you try."
Okay.
And I think that's something that I got ingrained into me. And at this point in my life, I'm not going to say I can't do something until I try it.
That's awesome. And I knew she was a good mom. And again, I don't want to touch too much. I know she's just recently
Mhm.
passed and you're probably still dealing with that. But, I lost my dad a year ago. So, and I'm, way older than you. So it's not easy no matter what age.
Mhm.
But now that you're on your own, how did your life change from that day to today in terms of how you feel about yourself and your abilities to be self sustaining, to lead yourself, to move from Florida to Georgia. We talked about that the other day. Like, that's a big move for any young
Oh yeah.
person. What were your thoughts going through? Like, I've got to get out of this rut. Like, what prompted you to move to Georgia?
I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on in my life. I mean, what started that train of thought, for those who don't know, back in, what was it, September, October of last year, over the span of a couple of weeks, we had two major hurricanes. I was living in a studio apartment during Helene, but Helene flooded it out, and I had to go live with my grandmother because I had nowhere else to go. And so that started the train of thought. But I knew Florida was extremely expensive, and I just wasn't getting much of anything out of it. I hated the weather. I wasn't a fan of the people, because there's a lot of rude people in Florida, I'm not gonna lie. But during Milton, I evacuated up to Georgia, and I felt this extreme sense of peace, like whatever darkness was in Florida had just been lifted off of me. And for the next couple months, while I was at Career Source, I did some reflecting. And to preface this, I'm a Christian. I believe that God called me to move to Georgia. And I tested that word out and got confirmation, and I made the move. It was bold, but um, I think it's helped me grow a lot.
So that's something that I think a lot of young people today don't understand. And I don't get real religious on this podcast. I don't get
Mhm.
real preachy, but I will tell you that as someone who's been where you are, and I had to make that move from Michigan to Georgia as well when I was like
Mhm.
16 because a lot of the same things. I was just trying to figure out life. And I got the opportunity. Now I didn't move by myself. I was 16 and moved with my dad, but just making that move, just leaving what you know and leaving the people
Yeah.
regardless is difficult. It's very hard. So I give you a lot of credit for that. That's a huge thing regardless. Not knowing what your situation's going to be, not knowing what your income's going to be like, not knowing
Mhm.
what's going to be, that's a huge move. What were some of the thoughts going through your head just in general about this move? Now, you said that you were called to do it, and I am a firm believer that when you hear something, feel something, it isn't just, oh, let's just go. It's there.
Yeah.
I'm doing what I do right now with families and kids. I'm not going to get into how it all started, but let's just say that I never dreamt in a million years I'd be doing this kind of work because, as you know, I did production, film and TV. It's kind of how you and I really kind of bonded. Was over the whole film and TV thing. Did that from age 17 to like my mid 40s. That's what I thought I was going to do forever.
Mhm.
So coming into this type of work was a complete, in my mind, I don't want to say a fluke, but it was definitely a divine intervention. Like I
Mhm.
had no idea that this would be so important to me, more so than anything. And so when you say that you were kind of called, I believe that 100%. I do. If people want to call us nuts, then let them go somewhere else because I believe it. And I think it's okay to say that. See, I kept that in for a long, long time out of fear of, well, what are people going to think if I say this? They're going to think I'm a nut job or a quack
Mhm.
or whatever. But now that I'm getting older and saying, you know what? No, there's definitely something out there. I think for young people to not feel that it's okay to express themselves is a huge disservice. Did you ever have the feeling that you couldn't fully disclose what you wanted or out of fear, just as a young person in general? Has there ever been that situation where you were just afraid to tell people what you wanted
What I wanted in what way?
in life, just for yourself?
Um, Maybe not what I wanted, but I think I was more afraid to talk to people about myself in general, because I believe that, there is a stigma against autism. And, my experience, especially in my teenage years, is, when I would tell somebody, they would just get this strange look on their face, like there's something wrong with me. And I want people to understand that our disability does not define us.
That's awesome. I think that goes for everybody with a disability.
Hmm.
Um, I think the good thing for you is you've known your whole life like what's going on. For those like myself that are older and we didn't have that kind of open disclosure when we were growing up, you just think there's just something wrong with you. Like your brain
Mhm.
just doesn't work right, or you
Yeah.
just don't think a certain way and that makes you weird. I had that growing up and it was a horrible feeling. Um, how do you respond when people assume autism equals a lack of empathy or emotion?
Um, I try to be gentle about it because I know everyone doesn't understand it, but I also try to correct them like, hey, just because we may act or react in this one way doesn't mean we don't have empathy or we don't feel emotion. We do. We just, I think some of us present it differently than, a normal person might.
Have you ever had situations where that came into play, it's like maybe in public, like say at work?
Mm, yeah, I think a couple years ago, I was working at Wawa. I was living with my grandmother at the time, and there was this instant where a lady just assumed that I had no empathy because there was just no emotion on my face whatsoever. I'm assuming she was having a bad day, and she became very agitated to the point where she was ready to call the manager for whatever reason. I was like, listen, ma'am, I'm sorry, I have autism. Can you bear with me? And she was really quick to just, calm down and apologize and try to meet me where I'm at. And I think that's all we ask out of people is just meet us where we're at.
Okay. And this is something that when I talk to people, especially younger people, um, leads me to the next question. How do you see Gen Z and younger millennials changing the conversation around autism?
Yeah, I think my generation and Gen Z in general has been very communicative about mental health. Um, I know a lot of our parents have had instances where they just wouldn't talk about it for whatever reason. But my generation, I think, especially online, there's been a lot of chat about mental health and how it affects us, and I'm glad that we have social media and the internet to talk about it because it's something that needs to be talked about. I see it as something that we should be talking about. My generation's been good at that.
Autism or not, I agree 100%. And what would you tell parents with a young child, say 5, 6, or 7,
Mhm.
who has been diagnosed, who's definitely on the spectrum? What advice would you give parents with a young child that just discovered or just now learning all the ins and outs of what it means to have an autistic child? What advice would you give them now that you're in your mid 20s and you can kind of look back and see how your childhood was and
Yeah.
schools and people in general? What are some things you would tell parents to help them navigate this world of having an autistic child?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the number one biggest thing is patience. Um, I know that's a difficult thing to have if you have a child that's on the spectrum, but it's something you have to learn. And as I said before, meet us where we're at. Not only that, but don't let us get comfortable in our space. Push it a little bit, push the boundary a little bit. Just don't push too far, if that makes sense.
So don't enable stagnation,
Exactly.
but lead with patience and compassion.
Hmm.
And then how important was it for you? Because I'm guessing your mom probably did, but if she didn't, maybe I was wrong. But I'm just knowing the couple times I met her, did she, when she wanted you to do something new, did she sit down and do it with you and kind of show you how to do things? Was she there to kind of go some hands-on with you? Like, what is your best learning style?
I mean,
And did she help you with that?
it was a case by case scenario. There were times where she would push me to do things by myself, but there were times where she had to sit down with me and push me to do something. I mean, one of my favorite memories that I had, especially as a child, I'm terrible at math, and I tried to do fractions on my own. I had a dreadful time trying to learn fractions. And what she decided to do with me one day is get me in the kitchen because we're a family. We love to bake and we love to cook. She got me in the kitchen and she taught me fractions through baking.
I love that. I love it. See, that is something that which again, for those who don't know, I have the book coming out in the seven principles to leadership, print leadership. The E in leaders is education. And I don't talk about math and science and biology. I'm talking about life skills, life, like you'd mentioned earlier, budgeting, math, um, all these things. I don't want to say math, just life stuff. So when you're learning math, use a life skill such as baking. You've got fractions, you've got a whole cup, you got two cups, you got two
Mhm.
thirds of a cup, you got teaspoons. What does that mean? That is the best way because not only are you teaching them how to cook for themselves, but you're teaching that self-efficacy. So when things go well, they want to do it again.
Mhm.
And when they feel good about themselves, their overall self-confidence in life expands, not just in one area, but overall. Like, oh, I can do that. I did that. I can do this. Oh, I can ride a bike. I can learn
Mhm.
how to ride a bike. I can learn how to bake a cake. That's what we need to do with our kids of all abilities, spectrum or no.
Yeah.
So what your mom did was an amazing thing by leading you and teaching you through example, but also teaching you another skill, which is how to feed yourself.
Yeah.
How do you read directions? How do you follow, the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients and what goes in where? Why do you use an egg? And why a whole cup instead of a half a cup? What's it going to do? Those are great skills. So what your mom did was an amazing thing. Okay. And I would hope that more parents would do this. Typically, back in the day, be a grandparent. We did those things back in the, 30, 40, well, actually longer than that. I'll say in the 30s and 40s, this is 30, 40 years ago, but back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, families would bake together. People would do things together. Dads would teach their sons how to change a tire or do something. And unfortunately, we had gender roles back then where only women worked in the kitchen and guys worked in the woodshed. Now we change all that because we need to, but that's great parental leadership what your mom did, so that's
Mhm.
awesome. I'm glad to hear that she you know did that for you. um Social media can be both a spotlight and a trap. Has it helped you hurt autism or awareness? I think you mentioned that a second ago. You like the fact that social media is making things more apparent.
Yeah, I do. But I also want to say I think that there should be a balance because I think there are some people online who try to enable excuses for their behaviors. And that's something I've seen. And so, yes, while we should be talking about, the stigmas and, how someone can be helped through, mental health disabilities, et cetera, we should not enable bad behavior.
See, and that's the E in my manager style parent. Man, you sound like you read my book. In my manager style, the E is enabling, which again, we don't want to do that as a leader because enabling is not teaching, it's not helping. It's kind of making things worse. And it's also creating that storyline in someone's head that I'm not good enough,
Hmm.
so why try? Right?
Yeah.
And for someone with a challenge, again, I don't like the word disability. Um, Someone with a challenge, allowing them to live in that negative space is the worst thing you can do because it just amplifies the belief system that they're not good enough. And so when they hit 24, 25, where you are 26, and they've had 15 years of this negative belief system, and now they're on their own, that's a horrible thing, which leads me to this. If you could go back and talk to your 14-year-old self, what would you say?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say that at that time in my life, I was an angry and depressed young man. I would say that this isn't the end. There are going to be some challenges, but you're going to come out a much better person.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Cody, I'm going to wrap this one up. And we're definitely going to do this again because there's so much we could talk about and there's so many things we go into. And I just want to thank you for your candor, your honesty. And I can just tell you this real quick before I wrap this up. When Cody left his last job, where we both used to work, a former coworker of mine, who was his supervisor, not mine, but his friend of mine, I found out he was leaving. And she came to me and she said, Cody's leaving me. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? She said, but he wrote me the most amazing letter, the resignation letter. And she actually started to kind of tear up because she was so impressed with your growth. And I think the biggest thing for all of us that knew you from back in 2020 and knew you from the what's he going to do to overcoming all the challenges that you had from where you're going to live, um, you're losing your mother, um, making this bold move to Georgia by yourself. Everybody has been incredibly impressed. And I just want to tell you that it doesn't always mean because people don't always say it that they don't see what you're doing, because everyone saw what you were doing and everyone was very happy for you. And I know that, yes, your mom's gone, but you have an extended family here in Florida. I'm sure it's going to be one in Georgia too. Everyone's going to want to follow and see what's going on with you. And I know that maybe you think, hey, I'll never work on a movie or never do that. Don't say never, because now you live in a state that's probably the number one film TV production state in the country. I'm going to say it surpassed California even. If not,
Wow.
it's darn right there. So as I told you the other day, you're right where you're supposed to be. Because a couple of years ago, everybody, he was like, I got to go to Georgia, but it's so expensive. How am I going to get there? And he didn't know. And so yesterday we were doing a pre-talk, and I said, you realize that a couple of years ago, you said, I got to get to Georgia, but it's expensive. I don't know anybody. And you were kind of on the fence. And I said, Cody, you're in Georgia. Like you are literally 20 minutes from the studio where everything is made in Fayette County. You're probably 30 minutes from another studio where In the Heat of the Night was shot back in the day, Vampire Diaries, all everything is just it's just exploding and you're there now. So, you know, do what you got to do. And we're all here to support you. And I'm really, really happy to see that you're moving forward and you haven't allowed labels and enabling or negative thoughts or hurricanes to get in your way to move forward and do what you got to do. So with that one, guys, I'm gonna wrap this up. Cody, thank you very much. I'll have you on again.
Thank you.
You can catch this on YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, LinkedIn. Please like and share. I'm going to cut this up into little pieces and little clips, and you can share this. And if you have any questions, if you're a parent with someone with autism, if you're a family member with someone with autism, or if you have autism, please reach out to me at Lead Your Teen. That's in LEADYOURTEEN at gmail.com. We'll talk about it and maybe we'll get you on this podcast and we can kind of, bring some more awareness, some positive awareness to autism and what that means and what that really looks like from those that are living it every day. So with that, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you guys so much. See you all very, very soon. Have a wonderful weekend.